you miming. The school was co-educational, and it began naturally enough to expand. But in 1919, the girls moved out and took over some ex-army huts in Alexandra Avenue. In 1930, they were able to move into the very classical building that still graces the area.
The hut. The other day, I came across some snaps that I had taken a long time ago, and in a flash, I was back in the hut, sitting in an outside form room, with door flung wide open. The song of the lark arose above the practicing of German vowel sounds, and as heads bent over exercise books, I could see green grass and a field of waving corn. For the sake of those who do not know what is meant by an outside form room, let me explain briefly the layout of the huts. A wide corridor led up the centre, with form rooms opening from it on either side. Through each of these inside rooms, you passed into an outside room, much to be desired in summer, but not so pleasant in winter. For when the wind blew hard, it seemed to come through every crack in the wooden walls, and sometimes even put out the one stove that heated each form room. At the top of the corridor was the hall, running across the width of the 4 classrooms. This, of course, had to be used not only for prayers, but also for gym, for singing lessons, and in the end, for a form room. As it was the only room in which there was any clear space at all, you can imagine the competition for it, for rehearsals, when a play was being produced. As the years went by, the roof began to leak rather badly. And what would you damsels of a later age say to doing your school certificate examination, with buckets and pails set about to catch the raindrops as they fell? Perhaps you would prefer the years when the sun blazed down on the corrugated roof, and the floor had to be watered to prevent the temperature from rising up to 100 degrees. Such was the inside of our school. Now what of the outside? Not a seat anywhere. Nowhere to sit except on the steps of the outside form rooms. No tennis courts, no netball court, and only a rough hockey ground. The netball court was just a cinder patch. Cricket and rounders were played on a piece of waste ground where the houses now stand in Alexandra Avenue. The road up the avenue, by the way, was not made up for a few years, so you ploughed your way to school through thick mud when it rained, counting yourself lucky if you arrived without losing a shoe or a rubber boot. Another problem was posed by the rats. These intelligent creatures, driven from their slum dwelling in the disappearing wheat fields, quickly realized that the kindly authorities had provided excellent alternative accommodation underneath the floors of the huts. Dry, safe, comfortable. Moreover, there were fragments of broken biscuits and crumbs dropped by girls during break, while an occasional bold and skillful raid into the kitchen pantry produced goodies galore. The rats hardly ever appeared during daylight, though on a few occasions, in wintry weather, I have seen a rat walk up the vertical wall of a neighbouring hut in an attempt to find some water in the frozen gutter above. Rat catchers lost their ferrets if these were introduced under the floors. Rat poison only produced smelly remains, which Mr. Manley, the caretaker, had to disinter armed with spade and bucket from under the floorboards. The ultimate answer, as Dick Whittington could have told us, lay in cats. So for several years, we had a family of cats, usually 10 in number, and marmalade in colour. Another excitement I remember was when an old girls' social was disrupted by a group of evil-minded young men from a rival establishment. They introduced some kind of tear gas through the outside ventilators of the hall, and the assembly broke up with coughs and streaming eyes. But within a few days, Miss Sheldon, with her detective ability, had found the identity of the malefactors. What happened to them, I don't know. They were probably shot at dawn. Now, could these have come from our brother school, we ask ourselves?
Well, the plain answer to that is no, of course they weren't. We were always an exemplary bunch of lads, weren't we? Well, a few years later, of course, the boys were then on the move, and in 1938 we were relocated here to Bradgers Hill, and the building was newly built for our purposes. And of course, shortly afterwards came the outbreak of the Second World War, and the school shared its facilities with an evacuated school, and it was also identified as a standby hospital.
The new award-winning building. The Architect's Journal, writing of this winning design, said, Messrs. Marshall and Tweedy have produced a plan which should have a splendid influence, the outstanding characteristic of their design being its simplicity. As the winner of the open competition, Marshall and Tweedy were awarded £200. Workmen were still putting the finishing touches to the building on the night before it opened. At 10:30 p.m. that evening, two men were cleaning the floor in the lower corridor with rags and turpentine, when one of the rags caught alight and flames spread quickly. A large container of turps caught fire, as did the rubber flooring. The caretaker, Bob Killick, dashed down the corridor and put out the flames with a large dust sheet. Next morning, some 417 boys and 23 masters made their way to Bradgers Hill and for the first time took their place in the assembly hall where a brief opening ceremony took place. By 10 o'clock, the boys were in their classrooms and the first day of term had begun. The Luton News, published on the same day, wrote in glowing terms of the entrance hall with its majestic suite of Indian silver grey wood panelling and the terrazzo steps of a spiral staircase rising very gently to the floor above. A corridor the length of the school with linoleum to Devon's hand and gloss paint in pastel blue covering the walls. The library is wood-lined with pictures on the wall, a homely fireplace and polished cork floor. Suitably sited and toning with the rest of the scheme is a wooded sports pavilion.
By this time, of course, the technical school had Park Square to itself, and that too began to expand. And in 1958, the pupils of that school then moved to a purpose-built building over at Barnfield Avenue.
New girl at Park Square. At the college, I found myself in a class of 25, 2 boys and 23 girls, drawn from quite a large area of Bedfordshire and bussed into the school daily. After a couple of terms, the number in class dropped to 23. Our form teacher was Miss Z. Lyons, a young woman with whom we could identify, very able and a good teacher. We were taught English, geography, history, French, arithmetic, bookkeeping, commerce, shorthand, typewriting, cookery, speech training, PT and games. I noticed from my report book that in the second year we also had classes in religious instruction and music, plus a period allocated to social activities, my choice being drama. We put on a performance of an excerpt from Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and I played Mr. Collins. So began the most intensive and rewarding period of my formal education. It was infinitely better being taught in a class of 25 pupils who wanted to learn, and by proficient teachers who demanded and had our attention. I seem to remember that each class period was 45 minutes, although some subjects were given twice that time. For instance, games. The college in Park Square didn't have any playing fields, so once a week we tramped through the town to Pope's Meadow, 20 minutes walk away. For 45 minutes of play, then tramped back again to Park Square. However, PT, for which we took off our gym slips and tucked our white blouses into our navy knickers, took place in the main halls, sometimes with onlookers from the balconies above. The college building seemed quite old. The main hall comprised the ground floor and two upper floors with balconies overlooking the ground floor. The classrooms were situated around the ground floor and the balconies. The students were allocated lockers. Mine was on the top floor. The uniform for girls was navy gym slip, white blouse, school tie, maroon blazer, navy hat with maroon hatband, which I still have, and navy gabardine raincoat. The lunch hour was long. Some of us had only 3/4 of an hour, others 1.5 hours. But we who had the shorter time left school earlier in the afternoon, which was nice because we had quite a lot of homework. I was very proud not to have been absent during my 2 years at the college. And the school friend and I, in the winter of 1947, when heavy snowfall stopped buses from running, walked from Dunstable to Luton so as not to break our record.
Flying saucers have landed. The light-hearted humour of the school was demonstrated by the scheming which went on behind the scenes when a debate was planned on the motion that this House believes that flying saucers have landed. Mr. Jones explains. On the morning I announced the details in assembly, I had arranged for a lad to dress up in green with suitable antennae attached to his head. At the end of my announcement, he appeared in full view outside the windows of the hall and scuttled and leapt the full length of the building in a most convincing imitation of everyone's idea of an alien. At the end of the week, with the debate due the following Thursday, I arranged with the groundsman to burn some mysterious circles in the grass at the top of the school field over the weekend, and to erect barriers around them made from striped rugby posts. On the Monday morning, with a perfectly straight face, Dr. Charlesworth announced that some strange marks had appeared on the field, and that on no account was anyone to go near them. We then watched from the top floor windows at break as practically the whole school all went across the field to see what it was all about. And this wasn't the end of the story either, because the following Monday morning, the caretaker, Sammy Lyon, was full of the story of how, on Sunday morning, a limousine had turned up at his house, and a number of men in grey suits had demanded to see the said marks. In those days, men from the ministry were sent to investigate all reports of unidentified flying objects. I'm not sure I ever got to the bottom of this. I suspect that we, the hoaxers, were the victims of an even more elaborate hoax.
Well, these few readings have given us just a snapshot, really, a glimpse of some of the history of the school. In 1966, Luton's education system underwent considerable change. A major reorganisation was planned, and the grammar school then became this country's first sixth form college. Now let us take a look at some features from our past. The grammar school boys will recall the end of term assemblies, signing the book if you came top of the class, God Be With You Till We Meet Again to music by Vaughan Williams, and then the final song to welcome the summer holidays, Dulce Domum, Home Sweet Home with Every Pleasure Bounding. So let's stand and deliver that song with some gusto. Well, here at the grammar school, the Wednesday morning assembly was highlighted by a musical item played or sung by one of the pupils. The rota was indeed organised by the music master. We had some outstanding talent in this school, and I'm not going to rehearse their names, but I would like to pay tribute to one of them, and I think we all recall the late David Grant, who was a most gifted musician. Today we are turning the tables on the last music master of the grammar school, Harry Hawke, and he will in a moment play a piano piece for us. And then in remembrance of the string players who entertained us, Harry will be followed by Michael Southgate on cello and accompanied by John Underwood. And then that will move smoothly into a tribute to the brass section, which is represented by Simon Rutter on trumpet. Simon is a past sixth form college student and the youngest of a family of grammar school brass players. And Simon in turn will be supported by sixth form college students who are also members of the Luton Jazz Youth Orchestra. Thank you, Harry.
Well, it's a great privilege to be here today in more ways than one. And I think it's marvellous that I'm able to be part of this great celebration. I came here in 1956, and I've worked it out that the first year boys at that time are now 57 or 58 years old.
No, we're 59.
So, welcome to you. I found the school wonderfully efficient. The bell used to go, and the school used to slip into gear like a well-oiled machine. I had greatest respect for my colleagues in the staff room. They were a wonderful crowd of men, all of them characters, people like Gusty Gale, some of you may remember, Russell Key, and so many others. And there was this chap, Harry Hawke, who used to be in a little room right at the very top of the building. And I carried on after two other music masters, Frank Bridger, I believe his name was, and was it?
Ronald.
Who was famous for rugby playing rather than music, and also Nichols, Mr. Nichols, who immediately preceded me. I enjoyed the singing mostly. I could never understand how such a wonderful sound came out of the mouths of such a load of little rascals. My years here ended up by being in the Sixth Form College, an entirely different ethos, which I also enjoyed. And funnily enough, after I retired in '82, I had 10 more years at a ballet school playing as a repetiteur, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So the Wednesday morning item was quite a feature. And at the beginning of every term, it was my lot to go forward and be the first of the batting order. With age of 84 and 2 arthritic thumbs, you're not going to hear Liszt's concerto or anything like that. But I have got a little Haydn sonata, which I'll play to you now.
remember when I was at school, I was one of the ones who was prevailed upon about 5 times during my time to play something in assembly. Nerve-wracking as hell, you know. And sitting over there, and Mr. Parry played the piano. Remember Mr. Parry? Let's begin, you know. And so, anyway, John, who was at the Technical College, and myself, would like to play for you a piece called The Swan, which is one of the pieces from Saint-Saëns' Carnival of Animals.
Good afternoon. I think originally for the brass, my uncle would have been the first choice. They're here with my Uncle Bernard Router. Used to play Lucy Long on the trombone. I think that was quite famous. Unfortunately, Uncle Bernard's not with us anymore. So I got nominated by the rest of the Routers to play out. I'm not going to play Lucy Long because I couldn't do it justice as I'm a trumpet player. This is one of my party pieces I do with, I run Luton Jazz Orchestra. This is the Pres Prado, that's right, Cherry Pink with an apple blossom wine.
Thank you very much, Harry. Thank you, John. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Simon, and all the players of the jazz orchestra. I might tell you, you don't want me to tell you this, but Kelvin Hopkins here is the occasional jazz critic for the local paper. So I'll be very interested to see what he has to say about that rendition. Mind you, you should have been with us earlier, Kelvin, to hear the Leaside 7 play, which has transported many of us back to our errant 50s and 60s. I say decades, not years. All right, now it's time for some individual reminiscences, and we're going to hear 4 contributions, 2 from the grammar school and 2 from the high school. From the grammar school, we're going to welcome Colin Humphreys and Barry Robinson, and then from the high school, Denise Barber and Ruth Hester, and they will share with you some of their abiding thoughts.
It's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon and see so many old friends again. The famous scientist Enrico Fermi once said, "Never underestimate the pleasure an audience receives in hearing something it already knows." So I'm going to tell you some memories, especially those past being from Luton Grammar School, and see if you can remember these. The school revolved around the second master, someone called Mr. Godfrey, known as Higgins. Mr. Godfrey was responsible for discipline, and he had a squint, you'll remember. And so when he looked at you, it was very terrifying, because one eye would bore into your face, and the other eye would be looking somewhere towards cover point. When he taught us mathematics. When he lectured to a class, when he taught a class, his face would be facing forward, but one eye would be over there, and the other eye over there. So it's a bit like the compound eye of a fly, and he could encompass the whole class. So whatever you did, you were never hidden from him. So he taught us mathematics, he taught me mathematics, and I remember 2 things he said. One was, he taught us that we should, after doing log tables, we should get a slide rule. He said, buy the most expensive slide rule you can afford, because you'll use it all your working life. And the other thing I remember is how he taught us mathematics, which really was very, very, very impressive. And I always remember how he taught us what a plus b all squared is. And I'm sure you remember this. It's a squared plus b squared plus 2ab. And he would say, cat plus dog all squared was cat squared plus dog squared, and don't forget the tail, right? 2 cat dog. So that was a brilliant way of teaching. And he was really very well respected throughout the school, and his lessons were memorable. Another maths teacher was Mr. Lane, known as Baffer Lane, because he bafforized people. And for those, the girls from the high school, bafforizing involved getting you by the short hairs just above an ear and twisting around and sort of lifting you gently out of your seat. So that was Baffer Lane. And he made a number of memorable comments. In fact, the 6th form had a comments book. You may remember the comments book, but we would write down the comments that masters made. Baffer Lane made this classic comment many times. He said, "Whenever I open my mouth, why is it that some fool speaks?" I also remember that he had this great ability to draw perfect circles on the blackboard. And you'll remember the way he did that. He was disabled. He had an arm with an artificial arm, and he had a ball and a socket joint at the elbow. So he clasped a piece of chalk in his hand, and he measured the distance from the ball, because that determined the diameter of the circle, and he'd then spin this arm. And I just mentioned one other teacher, because time is short, but you all remember Dr. Doney, John Doney, Doc Doney, whose hair was like Albert Einstein. And he taught history, but then on the weekends he'd take these parties of boys out into the countryside, long walks, and he wrote the Flora of Bedfordshire, and I was one of these people. And I actually knew the Latin names of over 2,000 plants at the end, and I wasn't alone. A number of other boys did this. And this was really typical of the dedication of the masters of the school. I just mentioned one more person in passing I remember, Christine Robinson, rather nubile assistant school secretary who sent our teenage hormones into overdrive. So, well, there's no time to say anything really at all about people like Major Evans and Harry Parry and Timber Woodcock, Pants Wareham, Gusty Gale, as we mentioned, and Harry Hawke. And I guess my overall memory of the school is one of a really dedicated staff. They had huge commitment, and you'll all remember they worked after hours, exceptionally, and also at the weekends. And the school was not only very good academically, but at sport. It really excelled at sport. I remember, assembly after assembly, Luton Grammar School would have won some cap. And also, not only the sport, but the music, and Harry Hawke. I mean, the school really excelled at music, and the recitals we had on a Wednesday morning were a delight. So it's a great pleasure to see Harry Hawke here and to hear him play. And I guess the number of people here is a tribute to the affection in which we hold our old school. And I certainly have very happy memories. I'm sure you all do as well. Thank you very much.
I was going to start by asking you all to switch off your mobile phones. Looking round, I can see most of you probably haven't even heard of them. Let alone know how to switch the damn things on and off. How to compress 8 years into 4 minutes? Well, with my appalling memory, I think it's just about right, actually. Especially when Colin, in his most amusing address, was pinched one half about Piggy Godfrey and the other half about sport. But seriously, I must have been here 3 or 4 years at the school before I realised that we didn't come here just to play sport. I thought the lessons were sort of a fill-in between the breaks and the after-school games. But I was sadly disillusioned when I joined Piggy Godfrey's maths class in year 5, or year whatever it is nowadays. Yes, I mean, to see Piggy at the end of the corridor between lessons come out and glare down with his baleful eye was one thing, but to see him at 3 feet range at the front of the maths class 5 times a week was quite something else. But of course, sport did play a big part in my school life. I remember, in fact, the very first cricket match I played for the school was one of the most memorable matches I ever played in my life, in a career of something like hundreds or even thousands of cricket matches. I was picked at the age of 11 to play the under 14 and a half. Why a half, I never quite understood. Under 14 and a half, 11. I was picked on ability, I have to say, in case you wondered whether it was a mistake. We went to play St Christopher's at Letchworth, and in the war years, with no coaches around, we caught the Eastern National Bus from Park Square. I think I actually do realise what I was picked now, because I was so small I didn't have to pay a fare. Anyway, we got to St Christopher's, and I distinctly remember Birdie Partridge, who was in charge of the team. I'm not quite sure why, he knew nothing about cricket. He turned up on his tandem with his wife. I assume it was his wife, we didn't go into the finer points. It was a good job he got there on time, because this is where I remember the match. It was over in just over half an hour. St Christopher's batted first. There were 5 all out. The opening bat carried his bat for 1 net out. There were 10 ducks, and there were 4 byes. I've been trying to find out who the errant wicketkeeper was, who contributed 4/5 of the total score. And I cannot for the life of me remember the bowlers who bowled them out. I think one was dear Alan Pakes, who died very young, as many of you remember. A chap called Went, who I've been trying to find out his Christian name, no one can remember it. Thank you very much, sir, wherever you are. Anyway, that was the most memorable match. We were back in Luton about 3:45, I think. And then we spent most of that time waiting for the bus to come back. In fact, although I taught cricket and rugby, I was never a great cricket school. We had one or two legendary figures, a chap called Crossman. I've been trying to find out his name. I'm reliably informed it was Mick Crossman, a very, very fast bowler indeed. We had a superb batsman, Derek Wood. I'm pleased to see Derek here. I think he said, would you insert the word stylish, but I can't. And a chap called Sam Thurlow, who played 5 years in the team. I think he's the only bowler on record who actually celebrated his 21st at the school. I think he forgot to leave. But of course, as we've heard, we were predominantly known for our rugby, and dear Ronnie Bridger, I didn't call him dear at the time, I seem to remember, a fearsome man, a wonderful South African rugby coach, and he produced teams year after year who went through the season unbeaten, or almost so. Legendary figures like Peter Adkins, Paddy Adkins as we called him, Bert Fensom, who's here today, Dudley Wood, 2 Oxford Blues, who's here today, Chapel Frank Mullinger, played for Oxford University, Ron Kelly, who's here today, Stuart Cameron, who's not here, sent his best wishes from Turkey. I think he said Turkey, or was he talking about Christmas? Anyway, he sent his best wishes, and Aubrey Ironmonger, another fearsome chap, whose daddy was on my side, because he tackled anything that moved and lots of things that didn't. But we were a fine rugby playing school. I had many, many happy hours on the rugby field, on the cricket field. One or two random memories just to finish with. Can you remember, the boys and the girls, where you were when the V2 rocket fell? In Biscuit Road, 1944. A group of us were potato picking in a farm near Hitchin. Were you there? You were the bloke who flung one. We've been trying to find out for years. I thought I mentioned it today. Yeah, the V2 rocket which landed in the Biscuit Road. I'm sure all the boys can remember the air raid shelters. I rang up a friend, I won't say it wasn't embarrassing. I said, can you remember what actually went on in the air raid shelters? He said, you can't mention that. So you're not going to hear about the air raid shelters. Mrs. Sankey, I thought she might get a mention. She ran the kitchens and she performed miracles with the food and the rationing. She did so well, we even forgave her those awful lumpy potatoes that were mostly black and grey and an indeterminate green colour, but she did wonderful things in the kitchen. I see some of you were bragging and putting your school number on your bell. I didn't put mine, I thought it might be showing off. I thought, I know somebody rang me up the other day, he said, can you remember your PIN number at the bank? I said, yes. I said, school number? I said, oh, he said, never got that. So I didn't put it on. I knew there were a few dodgy. Anyway, 8 years of happiness here, wonderful teachers, we've heard of some of them, others like Froggy Watson, John Muse, who became a lifelong friend of mine. I still go and see his wife, who's in a home only just around the corner, Monica Muse. Wonderful teachers, wonderful people, and those of us who came here made lasting friendships. Thank you.
School in 1933 and left in 1939, and my lot seem to be extremely thin on the ground here today, or perhaps we're lucky to be on the ground. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Miss Sheldon's dramatic production. She did a dramatic production each year, and when I was in the 5th form, I was cast as Lysander in a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. There was no fraternising with the boys at that time. We played all the parts. And it was a highlight of my time at Luton High School because I was extremely stage struck. For the whole of that term, all spare time was taken up with rehearsals, involving, if not a cast of thousands, at least a large proportion of the school population. The speaking parts were all doubled, and most of the first year became the fairy court of Oberon and Titania. We rehearsed at lunch times, a difficulty for me, as during the whole of my time at Luton High School, I went home to Dunstable on the bus for dinner. A practice which probably ruined my digestive system. We were also called in on Saturday mornings for rehearsals. Helen K. Sheldon could have given tips to Cecil B. DeMille on crowd control. We all sat for long periods on the hard fold-out wooden chairs in the hall, and woe betide any poor fairy who fidgeted and caused the chair to creak. Miss Sheldon had that evolutionary development of teachers, eyes at the back of the head, to a remarkable degree, and she would whip round and unerringly fix on the culprit. One look was enough. We all froze to immobility. Our Greek costumes, all homemade, consisted of ankle-length linen tunics with Greek key patterns in braid around the hem for female characters and knee-length for the males. Our footwear was also handmade. The soles cut from felt hoods donated by a hat manufacturer father and attached by ribbons which crisscrossed round the ankle. The first night came. My first line firmly in mind. You have her father's love, Demetrius. And as my felt soles, as I entered from, it was a stage very much like this, as you remember probably. As I entered stage left, full of thespian adrenaline, and as my felt sole touched the polished floor of the stage, I took off at speed and travelled across the stage where I collapsed ignominiously in a heap. My uppermost thought being, now I'm in trouble. There was an audible, concerted gasp from the audience. And although later I spent many years in amateur drama, I don't think I ever elicited such a satisfactory reaction from an audience.
I was at the Luton High School from 1947 to 1954. My first year at the high school was the first year of Mrs. Evans' headmistressship. I spent 30 years of my life in the building as a conundrum for you to work out. Who would have thought that 50 plus years ago, as we endured or enjoyed our history lessons, we would ever be part of history ourselves? Sobering thought, isn't it? But what about some of my historical memories? I could spend all afternoon reminiscing about my years at Luton High School. For instance, the freezing outdoor swimming pool, along with the wind-whipped changing cubicles, or the silently ordered corridors, or the formal and solemn speech days, or the Garrett Anderson house meetings. But looking around this imposing audience, I realise that the Luton Grammar School gentlemen among you could not enter into the experience of these delights. So I reason it would be more relevant to share some occasions when, may it be said in a hushed whisper, the ladies and gentlemen joined forces. I recall the fierce competition on the hockey field, resulting in many bruises for us girls, who never complained to the referee, but accepted it all in a true spirit of sportsmanship. We understood that the lads didn't completely comprehend the rules of hockey, and to hit the ball as hard as possible was the main objective. But, as far as my distant memory can recall, I have to say that the sporting girls were always victorious. And then there were the sixth form socials, another golden opportunity for the grammar school young men to invade our territory. I can't remember much about them, mercifully perhaps, except for one intriguing competition when it behoved some future housewives to sew a patch on their unfortunate partner's trousers. We were handed a square of material and a needle and a long piece of cotton. The seamstress who sewed the patch on first was the winner. Simple pleasures, great hilarity. I hope the person's not here today on whom I had to sew my patch. It was certainly not often that the gentlemen were allowed to enter our all-female domain. But what about the girls visiting these holy portals? On just one occasion, I recollect, Pat Gillespie and I were afforded this dubious privilege. We happened to be the only two candidates from the high school for the A-level Spanish examination. Consequently, for the oral examination, the examiner was not willing to expend his energies coming to the high school just for us. Therefore, we had to trek, dare I say it, up to the unfamiliar precincts of this building and find our way to the projection room for this ordeal. This was such an extraordinary event that it obviously warranted some sort of recognition. Unbeknown to us, one of the sixth form gentlemen actually took a photograph through the upstairs window of us traipsing up the drive in our yellow blazers, school hats, and our regulation Clark sandals. I still have the rather grainy photo to prove it. As I look back on my school days, I must say how grateful I am for the first-class education I received and for all the teachers and friends who made it such a happy time for me. To conclude, you may not know this, but the Luton Grammar School did produce a poet. Unfortunately, he did not become famous enough for me to remember his name. Allow me to redo his masterpiece. If he's present here today, I would be really grateful to him if he signed this copy. Paradise. Within the murk of Alexandra Avenue is paradise. There it shines, a blaze of flowers of dazzling celestial hue, a garden of pearls gleaming through rainbow haze. Among the bursting blossoms burning bright, swift birds of fire do fitly dart and sing. Not common is this place of pleasing night, the wasps of darkness here have lost their sting. Bound by Bradger's black and boggy bray, in purgatorial gloom we moan our fate. Must we be forbid our bliss foray? Sweet birds of paradise, unlock the gate.